Hello everyone, I'm Terry Duke, and welcome to my channel. In my last video, I reviewed a game that I played recently, Corpse Factory. If you never heard of the game, I really recommend you watch that video. I really enjoyed the game personally, and I think you could too. But this video is for the people who have already played the game and like me are trying to make sense of it. Corpse Factory was a game that took us into the minds of three characters as they started some very weird business. But while the name Corpse Factory is actually summing up the game quite literally, the game isn't as violent as you would think. It's mostly about the darkness of the mind. And this video is really about understanding those three characters, analyzing them, as well as finding the themes of the game itself. Now, big disclaimer though, these are just my opinions. It's a lot of speculations and it's my own interpretations of the message that the game is trying to convey. If there is a message at all. If you enjoy the content, you can leave a like and subscribe to support the channel. I'm nearing 1,000 subscribers as of making this video, and you can have a hand in helping me get there. And if you're watching this video after I already passed 1,000, well, help me get to 2,000. Or 10,000. Or 1,000,000. Doesn't matter, just subscribe. Thank you. Now onto the video. If I were to summarize my interpretation of Corpse Factory in the simplest way possible, it would go something like this. Corpse Factory is predominantly a criticism of the internet, how it creates loneliness and envy, but also enables mental illnesses and leads to a general dehumanization between people and their actions, like in the case of cyberbullying. The three main characters themselves also bring some more symbolism. Noriko, I felt, symbolized the human need for personal accomplishments, and the distress that comes from not being in control of our own lives. Kojiro's obsession with the dead is symbolic for the need to connect with people. And Aoi's burning desire to be Noriko is all about envy, naturally. I'm doing my best to structure this mess of an essay, I promise. What I want to do is analyze each character to try and understand their motives and what mental illness they may have but are not explicitly saying. Then I will explain how all the characters and their symbolism tie into my main interpretation of the game, that the internet is bad. Yeah, I know, it's real deep. But let's start with who I think is the incidental mastermind of the entire story, Kojiro. By the end of the game, we learned so much about Kojiro that we need to unpack it. So here's what we know about Kojiro. He actually used to go by the name of Nobel Sinclair and wrote novels about characters, doing silly things with corpses like dressing them up and taking them out to dinner. At some point, he quote-unquote lost his name in a fire and renamed himself Kojiro. Most likely, this means the law was closing in on Sinclair and he had to burn the evidence and change his identity. While we are in Kojiro's head, we also learn a lot of weird stuff, like the fact that he had been stalking Noriko for over a year before he approached her in the library in Act 1. He used to live in her current apartment and fell in love at first sight when they briefly met, as she was moving in and he was moving out. We also learn Kojiro was obsessed with corpses and taking them out of the morgue to mess around with long before he met Noriko. Something else we learn is his love for a previous woman called Shizuko, but she died and he's been desperate to fill the void in his heart ever since. When she died from being run over by a car, he actually dragged her back to his apartment, and in an attempt to let go of his death obsession and move on with his life, he built some kind of shrine in his apartment, putting Shizuko's corpse in the center, and all the pictures and books that he had that related to corpses. However, that did not get him rid of his old habits, as he now has a corpse in his own closet for holding his clothes. The conclusion, though, is that Kojiro is madly in love with Noriko and just wants to win her over by any means necessary to fill the void in his heart left by Shizuko. Kojiro is incidentally what sparks the whole story. His leaving his dead fiance's body in the apartment leads to Noriko finding it and the subsequent creation of Corpse Girl. So why is Kojiro so obsessed with the dead and consequently with Noriko? The game does warn that it depicts mental health issues, and the first thing that comes to mind is that Kojiro is a necrophiliac. Necrophilia, however, usually means people who are specifically sexually aroused by corpses. That's not necessarily true though. According to Wikipedia, the term can also be used broadly to describe a fascination with death. And in that context, I think it's safe to say that's what Kojiro is. We know from the prologue that Kojiro is in fact Nobel Sinclair, and here's how he describes Sinclair in his first interaction with Noriko.
No one can figure out if these books are fiction.
Well, although Kojiro never explicitly confirms it himself, the fact that he wrote an entire book on Corpse Factory and basically just told the whole truth about it, it suggests to me that Sinclair's previous books were all autobiographical. Kojiro has dressed up corpses, taken them out to dinner, and yes, even filled a whole classroom with them. So he is a necrophiliac. That's why he's so obsessed with the dead. But more broadly, again, this is just my personal interpretation, but I think Kojiro's obsession with corpses is symbolic of loneliness. Kojiro is a quiet, reserved person that longs for human connection. Working with corpses all day at the morgue, Kojiro is surrounded by death, and he expresses several times that he needs someone to love to avoid falling into despair. Because the corpses are, well, dead, they don't complain, they don't reject, they can be whatever he wants them to be, and this is how he escapes his loneliness. And I think subconsciously, Kojiro's attraction to Noriko is because she very much looks like a corpse. While she seems generally pretty, she's also very pale, fragile, and anorexic. Unbeknownst to Noriko until the end of the game, her anorexia was a direct attempt to look like corpse girl she had found in the closet. By the time she moves to the factory, which stinks of rotting bodies, she doesn't wash frequently, she's very frail, she's about as close as anyone can get to being a living corpse. And even though Kojiro is concerned for her health, he also comments that he still wants her more than ever. That's the closest Kojiro gets to admitting to being a necrophiliac. Or if he's never crossed that line, Noriko is the closest he'll ever get. Another reason he may be absolutely devoted to Noriko is because of the story he's created with her. Much like Sinclair's books actually describing his own experiences, Corpse Girl is a story that he created through years of unhealthy obsession with the dead. Noriko is symbolically a story that he wants to write, to complete, to be an integral part of, because it's his story. It's also interesting to note that Kojiro isn't quite over his late fiancée, Shizuko, and often compares her and Noriko. Based on what little information we have about Shizuko, it's not even clear whether the love he had for Shizuko was genuine or reciprocated. Here's what we know about Shizuko according to Kojiro. At some point, Shizuko gave Kojiro a French coffee press for his birthday. He became passionate about brewing the perfect coffee cup, but ironically, Shizuko never loved coffee. Much like Kojiro, she was a loner. The reason he was able to hide her body without her being declared missing is because apparently no one knew or cared that she existed. It's unclear whether she loved him at all. Apparently she hated a lot of his quirks and tried to get him to change. The night she was killed, they went on a date, but although he dressed up nicely, apparently she didn't comment on it. And when he proposed to her and put a ring on her finger, she did not comment either. It seems to me that Kojiro and Shizuko may not have loved each other all that much, or maybe he loved her but she didn't love him. If they both struggled with loneliness, it suggests that they may have clung to each other to avoid despair. With Noriko, in contrast, when they went on a coffee date, she loved the coffee, and she shared his interest in the macabre. Even if Noriko did not have feelings for Kojiro, she could be seen not just as an escape from despair, but a genuine kindred spirit. To recap, Kojiro is, I think, a symbol for loneliness and the human need for companionship and socializing. A lot of mental health issues can be prevented by just having someone to talk to on a regular basis, and Kojiro, being isolated, is clearly aware of that. Now let's talk about Noriko. Noriko is a character that initially feels very relatable. She's very introverted, but she has a friend she talks to frequently, she has interactions with her colleagues, she likes to read and look up people's mundane lives on social medias. For the most part, Noriko is just trying to live a normal life, really. Her dark side gig with Corpse Girl isn't about the violence itself, it's about the power it gives her. Noriko's lust for power over other people's lives is a response to her own powerlessness in her own life. As we come to learn, her father walked out on the family, her mother tried to hang herself in front of her and her sister. This led her sister to become a low-life criminal, while Noriko herself developed crippling agoraphobia. It took Noriko a long time to overcome the traumas of her life, as well as medication. But when she discovered Corpse Girl in the closet, the shock and utter terror at the sight seemed strong enough to undo years of recovery and bring her back to a state of vulnerability. However, Corpse Girl's power, that of getting people to kill themselves by making them look at their own death, is an incredibly addictive feeling for Noriko. She may not have much control over her own circumstances, but the power of holding someone else's life in her hands gives her a big rush, and it's all she lives for. So I would say Noriko's character symbolizes two things: the struggle for self-determination and the human need for personal accomplishment. Noriko's struggle for self-determination is often hindered by the influence other people have over her. Her agoraphobia was influenced by her suicidal mother. Corpse Girl herself was placed there by Kojiro, without which she may have went on a completely different path. And based on later claims made by Aoi, Noriko may not have been responsible for most of Corpse Girl's kills. This means that even at what Noriko perceived to be the height of her popularity and accomplishments, there was still someone actually influencing the outcome. Noriko craves empowerment, and she gets it from her accomplishments with Corpse Girl. And her story is also about how, as individuals, we are in a constant struggle for autonomy over ourselves, for control over our environment, and sometimes the people around us. Then there's Aoi. Up until Act 3, we assumed Aoi was pretty much harmless and a victim of her circumstances, but then she dropped a whole bunch of truth bombs and it turns out she's a mass-murdering maniac. Turns out the herald of the human service is in fact Aoi. She's hated Noriko since they've met in high school because she wants to be Noriko and she hates herself. She was the one in the first act that requested Noriko's death on Corpse Girl's website. She claims credit for killing Corpse Girl's victim instead of them killing themselves. She decided to kill Corpse Girl's victims as a way of messing with Noriko, but it had the unintended effect of making Noriko's ego skyrocket. So yeah, complete shift in personality and a lot of weird revelations. And it's at this point in the game that I was feeling a bit turned off. These revelations appeared to make no sense for a character like Aoi, but also, it felt cheap. Like, if she killed Corpse Girl's victims, then I guess Noriko, Tomoe, and Kojiro were just all being tricked the whole time, and they never actually killed anybody? The premise of sending victims their own corpses to trick them into killing themselves was a good one for the game, but now we have to assume it never worked, because this one character is nothing like she seemed since the beginning. Here's an example of what feels like complete nonsense. One thing Aoi confessed internally is that she was the one to request Noriko's death back in Act 1. The game conveniently tells the date every new day, so I went back to Act 1 to find out when exactly does Noriko receive requests for herself, and I noted that it happened on Sunday, May 31. So naturally, that is also the same day Aoi sent the request. But their last interaction together was the day before, on Saturday, May 30. This is when Noriko showed up to Aoi's cafe and learned of Aoi's family stalker. In that exchange, Aoi breaks down crying, and if you choose to give her space, Aoi will call Noriko soon after leaving. Noriko comforts her, and the two agree that she will quit her job at the cafe and work with Noriko. It was actually a touching moment in the game, but now we learn that after the call, Aoi went back home and actually requested Noriko's death. Just why? How is this person the same as a murdering maniac? And why is it that of all the people making Aoi's life harder, she targets the one person that is always on her side? Seriously. This is why, going back to Act 3, I just don't like what they did with Aoi. It feels very lazy. Or does it? Remember, one thing the game likes to do, besides putting us in the head of key characters, is also have those characters display mental illnesses. And while both Kojiro and Noriko clearly display some issues, neither explicitly tell us what those are. If we assume the same for Aoi, then is there a mental illness Aoi could have that explains her drastic change in behavior? Turns out there is. DID. Short for Dissociative Identity Disorder, more commonly known as split personalities. There is a misconception that people with DID can have multiple alters, each with their own names, but some people with DID can actually have 2 or more personalities that share the same name. For people like this, saying the switch in personality can be hard to spot if you're not aware of the illness. Furthermore, while there is no clear evidence on what causes DID, there is a clear pattern of people with it having experienced severe trauma, specifically during childhood. Both Aoi and Noriko mentioned that Aoi was severely attacked by her father when she was in high school. This could be the cause of her disorder. And when she is knocked unconscious while finding Tomoe, she describes having an out-of-body experience. And as it turns out, out-of-body experiences are a possible symptom of dissociative identity disorder. So basically what we learn in Act 3 is that Aoi has at least 2 distinct personalities that share the same identity. So the switch from one personality to the other can happen at any given time without Aoi even noticing or pointing it out. On one side, we have the Aoi we knew since the beginning, shy, crippling OCD, all around sweet and harmless. The other Aoi though, she is filled with rage. She despises Noriko and is obsessed with killing Noriko to take her place. This Aoi joined the human removal service with the sole purpose of messing around with Noriko and Corpse Girl. One moment Aoi will seek comfort from Noriko, but the next, she'll request her death on Corpse Girl's website. She will express genuine love for Junpei in one instance, be genuinely disgusted with him the next. It took me some time to make sense of Aoi, but when I did, it gave me a new sense of appreciation for the game in Act 3. Suddenly, it's not too bad, though personally I still feel a bit cheated by the twists. I don't like that in order for Aoi to be a complete twist, it takes away from Noriko's power as Corpse Girl. But still, these are the 3 main characters of the game: the struggle for loneliness, the struggle for self-determination, and the struggle of envy. These are the inner struggles through which all 3 characters interact with each other on their path of mass murders, which all go rather well with the game's criticism of the internet. The internet, as the game shows, allows for not only the main characters, but for society as a whole to disconnect themselves from the very real consequences of their own actions. One thing that Noriko emphasizes a few times throughout the game is that she does not technically kill anyone, she only gets people to kill themselves. For me, this is a criticism of cyberbullying. The people who go on Corpse Girl's website have the power to request any death for any reason, while also staying completely anonymous, much like with online harassment. And it's this disconnect that allows people to get other people killed without feeling guilty. The only person to see through the hypocrisy is Kojiro, who plainly sees what Corpse Girl does as murder, and coincidentally, he's the only character to be a generation older and not much of an internet user. Corpse Factory also touches on the shallowness and impatience created by the internet. In Corpse Factory, requesting a death is as easy as buying something online. The corpse factory itself is no different than an Amazon warehouse, taking orders online and shipping them to people's front doors. And just think about it for a sec. If it was indeed as easy to kill someone as it was to buy something online, how long would it take until people actually do it? A factory filled with corpses is a representation of the internet in its darkest form. It only exists because of the internet, which disconnects and dehumanizes the people consuming it. It can enable the absolute worst of humanity, from pure shallowness to mental illnesses. The corpse factory becomes a very absurd, but somehow inevitable outcome of such a shallow, disconnected world, delivering death to anyone who requested it on a whim. Is this a world we want to live in? And that's about all I've got for today. Corpse Factory was a very fascinating game, and the more you think about it, the better it gets. But what do you think? Am I onto something, or am I way off on the interpretation? Let me know in the comments, and while you're at it, feel free to like and subscribe to support the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.